Welcome back to Honors Biology. Today we're going to be looking at cells. So we're starting a new unit, starting cells, and we'll be looking at cells as the basic building blocks of life. So we learned that the building blocks of life are four macromolecules: carbs, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And then those come together to form our smallest unit of life, which is the cell. So we actually have, scientists love our theories, so we actually have a cell theory that goes along with cells. It has three parts to it. The first part is that all organisms are made of cells. So if it's considered alive, it is at least one cell in there. So all living things are made of cells. Two, that the cell is the basic unit of life in all living things, so we can't get any smaller than the cell and consider it to be alive. And again, in any living thing, the smallest form of life is the cell. And then all existing cells, or all cells, come from pre-existing cells. And we'll kind of cover that, the cell cycle, how cells grow and multiply later. But those are the three tenets of the cell theory. All organisms are made of cells. The cell is the basic unit of life in all living things. And then all cells come from existing cells, or pre-existing cells. So why this is important, why does the cell theory matter? The cell theory shows that all of life shares a similar structure. It doesn't matter what it is. You, me, your dog, your cat, a fungus, bacteria, it doesn't matter. They all share a similar structure around it. Now, before we start talking about like cell organelles and what's in a cell, there's two different types of cells that we'll be talking about. One's a prokaryotic cell and one's a eukaryotic cell. All right, so two different types. To help you kind of keep track of the two different types and why they're different, I would make a Venn diagram comparing prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. You don't have to do that, but I would recommend you do that. So if you would like to do that, pause the video and take time to set up in your notebook to make this. So let's move on. Let's talk about prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells though. So there's two types: prokaryotic, eukaryotic. So they are different. Prokaryotic cells typically there are bacteria. Those are our unicellular, so like our one cellular organisms are prokaryotic cells. And then our eukaryotic cells, they're the multifunction. They're the ones that kind of do this cell differentiation thing. They're the ones that form the complex living organisms like you, me, dog, cat, plant, yada yada. Now, they do share some similarities. One is a plasma membrane. So all cells share a plasma membrane, which is this outer region of the cell. They share cytoplasm, which is like this inside jelly-like fluid of it. They both have DNA, although what that DNA looks like is different. And then they both have ribosomes, and ribosomes are a site of protein synthesis. So we just learned about proteins and the amino acids and the peptides, all that stuff. The ribosomes are where that stuff is assembled inside the cell. So there are some similarities there. Let's talk about the differences. One is prokaryotic cells. They don't have a membrane-covered nucleus. So in eukaryotic cells, we talk about the nucleus being kind of separated from the rest of the cell. They don't have that. So it's just there's no really nucleus to speak of. They have no membrane-covered organelle, so they don't have a Golgi apparatus. They don't have a mitochondria, right? They don't have these things that have a separate membrane around them. Their DNA is circular. So instead of how we talked about a double helix, how it's more of a linear path for DNA, prokaryotic cells don't have that. Their DNA is circular, which has special characteristics with that as well. And then they're also bacteria, right? Bacteria, they're tiny, they're smaller than the eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells, they're smaller, they don't have membrane covered organelles, have no, all these things. So that's prokaryotic cells. They're really the simplified version of a eukaryotic cell. oops, not this one. Eukaryotic cells, though, they have a nucleus, so they have this nucleus region where the DNA is in. They have membrane covered organelles, so they have organelles in here that has a membrane around it. The DNA is linear. We talk about DNA being a double helix. That's a linear function with a start and an end to it. And then all other cells, again, we need the eukaryotic cells to form the complex life. Like for us, for plants, for fungus, stuff like that, we need these eukaryotic cells to do that. So you should now have enough information to finish that Venn diagram. So go ahead, you can pause the video, you can rewind it. So go ahead and finish up that Venn diagram, and then we're gonna move on and talk about the cell organelles in the eukaryotic cell. So organelles, what they are, is they're the ones that enable the cell to live, grow, and reproduce. All right. A cell is the basic unit of life. And then inside that cell, there's a bunch of little things that help it do its functions. Now, we're not going to be talking about all the organelles. We just don't have the time to talk about all the organelles and how they work together. So we'll only be functioning on 4 or 5 key ones. So our first organelle it's not really an organelle, it's cytoplasm. So the stuff inside the cell, it's not just like floating in space. It's there's a jelly-like fluid that holds all the organelles more or less in place. And then this is called cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is what kind of makes the cell up. So let's start with the nucleus. So the nucleus, this is your control center of the cell. And the nucleus is what contains the cell's DNA. The nucleus, it has a membrane around it. So inside the middle here, there's the nucleolus, which is the very center of the nucleus. DNA is all around it. And then inside, and then encompassing the nucleus is the nuclear membrane. So you can kind of think of it of like the mayor's office. Like this is where all the blueprints are stored. This is where the rest of the cell kind of gets its orders from. It's from the nucleus. The next is the mitochondria. We may all be familiar with this. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah, and that's what it is. The mitochondria is really the power center. This is where the energy we're talking about, so the energy we get from glucose and fructose and galactose, like this is where it goes, and this is where we kind of make it into a usable form of energy for us. And we'll get more into that process later, but just know that the mitochondria is where this like energy synthesis happens. It happens in the mitochondria. And it is the electric company of the cell. Like this is where, like again, this is what powers the whole thing, is the mitochondria. Next are ribosomes. So we've been talking about proteins, and we know that proteins are really important for human function. Like carbs, lipids, and nucleic acids are good. They do the rest of this stuff. But ribosomes are where our proteins are made. So like our enzymes to digest lactose, like wouldn't it be possible without enzymes? So they're where the proteins are made, and even the different cell parts are made of proteins are made at ribosomes. These are like the factories. These are like the workhorses of the cell. These are ribosomes. Next is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane, it's the outer layer of the cell, and this is that border. This is that allow nutrients into the cell and with waste is outside the cell. This is where that happens, and it is a phospholipid bilayer. So you remember from lipids, I talked about phospholipid bilayer, and we'll talk about later. This is that later part. This is where we're talking about that phospholipid bilayer. It is a phospholipid bilayer, and I have a whole separate video dedicated to the cell membrane that you'll watch later. It kind of goes in more in depth with the cell membrane, so that's coming. So be excited for that. Next, so there's the next two organelles we're going to talk about are only found in plant cells. So up to this point, all the cells we've been talking about are found in both of them. The next two are only found in plant cells. One is the cell wall. So they're only found in plant cells, and what the cell wall does is really it protects and supports this cell. So the reason why trees can grow upright and can grow so tall is because if you look, these plant cells have this cell wall around here, and that helps support it. That helps support other cells on top of it. So the cell wall is super important. And then also chloroplast, good to photosynthesis. So this is where that happens. It happens inside the plant cells and it happens inside the chloroplast. Again, they're only found in plant cells. They contain chlorophyll, which is what makes plants green. And it's where photosynthesis takes place. Now, just a common thing to talk about is a lot of students think that like these chloroplasts or mitochondria, there's only one of them inside each cell. That's not true. Plant cells will have like a dozen chloroplasts inside one cell to make it happen. They might have 3 or 4 mitochondria. All right. So there can be multiple of chloroplasts and multiple of these mitochondria in there to help it work. So just to clarify some things. So in plant and animal cells, so in both of them, we find a nucleus, mitochondria, cell membrane, and ribosomes. Students seem to think that, oh, instead of a mitochondria, there's chloroplast, and instead of a cell membrane, instead of a cell wall. That's not true, all right? Plants also have a mitochondria, and they also have a cell membrane, okay? Plants just also have chloroplast and a cell wall. So make sure you distinct that. And to help you distinct that, I would recommend doing another Venn diagram, plant cell, animal cell, comparing and contrasting the organelles that are found in either of them. So feel free to rewind this video, go back, look at that, and fix it up. All right. So next week in class, when I see you again, we'll be looking at cells with microscopes. So get excited for that. We'll kind of walk through the cell theory and how it was developed. And you'll see some of these organelles in prepared slides. So get excited for that. So if you have any questions, please write them down. Please feel free to email me. We'll talk about it in class. Other than that, have a great day.